The pre-dawn air at RAF Takali smelled of aviation fuel and fear. Second Lieutenant James Whitmore stood beside his Hurricane fighter, watching mechanics make final adjustments to the gun bays. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his flight gloves, not from cold, though the Mediterranean wind cut through his thin flight suit, but from the electric anticipation of what was coming. 23 years old, fresh from training at RAF Cranwell, with exactly 47 hours of solo flight time, James had arrived in Malta 3 days ago. The island sat like a defiant fist in the middle of the Mediterranean, strategically positioned between Sicily and North Africa, making it both invaluable to the Allies and a constant target for Axis forces. The Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica had been pounding the tiny island for months, determined to neutralize its threat to their supply lines. Squadron leader Robert Thornhill approached, his weathered face showing the strain of too many missions and too little sleep. At 36, he was considered ancient by fighter pilot standards. His eyes, surrounded by deep lines, studied James with an expression somewhere between pity and resignation. "Whitmore, you'll fly as Red 4, tail-end Charlie position. Stay in formation, watch your 6, and for God's sake don't do anything heroic. Your job is to come back alive and learn. That's all." James nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He'd heard the stories about Malta. The island had been under siege since June 1940, enduring more bombing than London during the Blitz. Pilots here flew 4, sometimes 5 missions a day. The average survival time for a replacement pilot was measured in days, not weeks. Flight Lieutenant David Morrison, call sign Bulldog, walked past without acknowledgement. Morrison had 17 confirmed kills and the Distinguished Flying Cross. He'd been on Malta since October, an eternity in this meat grinder. To him, James was already dead, just another replacement, who'd be shot down before learning which end of the Browning machine guns the bullets came out of. "New boy's going to get someone killed," Morrison muttered to his wingman, loud enough for James to hear. "Look at him shaking, probably piss himself before we even engage." The other veterans laughed, but it was hollow humor. They'd all been new once, though few remembered it. Malta had a way of burning away everything that came before. James climbed into his Hurricane's cockpit, the smell of oil, and cordite greeting him like an old friend. At least this was familiar. He'd logged hundreds of hours in Hurricanes during training, though those had been peaceful flights over the English countryside, not life-or-death struggles against experienced German and Italian pilots. The engine coughed to life with a thunderous roar, the Rolls-Royce Merlin's 12 cylinders producing 1,100 horsepower of raw power. James ran through his pre-flight checks mechanically, trying to calm his racing heart. Oil pressure good, fuel mixture rich, gun sight illuminated, 8 Browning 303 machine guns loaded with 2,660 rounds total. The radio crackled to life. "All red section aircraft. This is control. Radar reports large formation approaching from the north, estimated 40-plus bandits. Angels 15 bearing 340. Scramble, scramble, scramble." James's heart hammered against his ribs. 40 enemy aircraft. This wasn't a probing raid or harassment mission. This was the real thing. Thornhill's Hurricane lurched forward, and the rest of the flight followed. James pushed his throttle forward, feeling the Hurricane accelerate down the cratered runway. Someone had filled in the latest bomb holes with rubble just hours ago. The fighter bounced once, twice, then lifted into the air, the ground falling away beneath him. Malta spread out below, a scarred landscape of ancient stone buildings, bomb craters, and desperate defenses. The island was barely more than 17 miles long and 9 miles wide, yet it had absorbed more tonnage of bombs than any other place on Earth. From above, James could see the grand harbor at Valletta, still smoking from yesterday's raids, and the scattered remains of what had once been airfields. "Red section, form on me." Thornhill's voice came through the headset, steady and calm. "Climb to Angels 20. We'll have the sun at our backs." James tucked into formation, his Hurricane rising through scattered clouds. Below, the Mediterranean stretched endlessly, a deceptively peaceful blue. Somewhere out there in the haze between sea and sky, 40 enemy fighters and bombers were approaching, intent on reducing what remained of Malta to rubble. At 15,000 feet, James could see them, dark specks against the northern horizon, growing larger by the second. His mouth went dry. He'd imagined this moment countless times during training, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of watching death approach at 300 miles per hour. Tally-ho! Morrison's excited voice cracked through the radio. Stukas with Mi-109 escorts. Looks like 24 dive bombers, 20 fighters. The German formation was textbook perfect. Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers in tight formation, protected above and behind by Messerschmitt Bf-109F fighters. The 109s were superior to the Hurricane in almost every respect. Faster, more maneuverable, better armed. The only advantage the Hurricane had was durability and, if the pilot was skilled enough, turning radius. Red section will bounce the escort fighters, Thornhill commanded. Draw them off the bombers so the anti-aircraft guns can work. Remember your training. Work in pairs. Don't get separated. James tried to swallow, but his mouth had gone completely dry. The formation ahead was growing larger every second. He could now make out individual aircraft, the distinctive gull wings of the Stukas, the sleek predatory lines of the Messerschmitts. Here we... Go, lads, Thornhill said quietly. Then louder, Red section, attack! The 6 Hurricanes dove toward the enemy formation like hawks stooping on prey. The world compressed into a tunnel of speed and sound. Wind screamed past the canopy. The Merlin engine roared. And then suddenly they were in the middle of it. A Messerschmitt flashed past James's canopy, so close he could see the pilot's face, young, blonde, probably no older than himself. Tracer rounds stitched the air around him, bright. Geometric patterns against the blue sky. Someone was screaming over the radio. An explosion blossomed to his left. He couldn't tell if it was friend or enemy. Red 4, brake left, brake left! Morrison's urgent voice penetrated James's paralysis. James hauled the control column left purely on instinct. A Messerschmitt that had been lining up behind him overshot, its pilot cursing in German over the open radio frequency. James's training took over. Throttle forward. Bank right. Climb. His. Hurricane responded sluggishly compared to the nimble 109. But it responded. The German pilot was good. He'd already corrected, coming around for another pass. James could see the muzzle flashes from the 109's nose-mounted cannons. 20mm shells ripped through the air where his Hurricane had been a heartbeat before. Everything his instructors had drilled into him for months suddenly crystallized. Don't turn with them. You'll lose. Use your strengths. The Hurricane could take punishment. It could outturn anything in the sky if given enough space. James pulled into a steep climbing turn, bleeding off speed deliberately. The Messerschmitt, going too fast, shot past again. For a moment, just a heartbeat, James had a clear shot. His thumb found the gun button on the control stick. 8 Browning machine guns roared to life, sending 2,660 rounds per minute downrange. Tracer rounds walked across the Messerschmitt's fuselage. Metal sparked. The 109's canopy shattered. The aircraft nosed over, trailing black smoke, and began its long fall toward the Mediterranean. James's hands shook on the controls. He'd just killed a man. Someone's son, possibly someone's father. A human being who'd been alive 5 seconds ago. Good kill, Red 4! Thornhill's voice brought him back. Stay alert. There's 3 more on your 7 o'clock. 3 more. James twisted in his seat, looking back. 3 Messerschmitts were forming up, recognizing the new pilot, and moving in for the kill. The sky had become a chaotic swirl of aircraft. Hurricanes and Messerschmitts locked in a deadly dance, while below them, the Stukas began their screaming dives toward Valletta's harbor. The lead 109 came in high, forcing James down. The second swung wide, trying to cut off his escape. The third held back, waiting for James to make a mistake. It was a coordinated attack, the work of experienced pilots who'd hunted together before. James did the only thing he could think of. He turned into the attack. Instead of running, he aimed his Hurricane directly at the lead Messerschmitt, committing to a head-on pass that would end with one or both of them dead. The German pilot's nerve broke first. At the last possible second, the Messerschmitt broke right. James held his course, guns blazing, and felt impacts shudder through his Hurricane as the second 109's guns found him. A shell punched through his left wing, leaving a ragged hole. Another shattered his rear canopy, filling the cockpit with freezing wind. And the smell of cordite, but he was still flying. The Hurricane, built like a tank, kept going. The wounded enemy fighter fell away, trailing coolant. James didn't see where it went. The third Messerschmitt was coming around, determined to finish what his wingmen had started. James's Hurricane was slower now, the damage affecting its performance. He could feel the controls getting mushy. But he still had guns. And more importantly, he was starting to understand something crucial. These German pilots, good as they were, had patterns. They attacked the same way, broke the same way, expected the same responses. The third Messerschmitt came in from James's 5 o'clock, the classic killing position. James waited, counting seconds. His instructor's voice echoed in his head. Patience wins fights. Panic loses them. The 109's guns lit up. James broke hard right, then immediately reversed left. The German pilot, expecting James to continue his turn, had already committed. For one perfect moment, the Messerschmitt hung in James's gun sight. James pressed the trigger. His remaining ammunition, he'd already burned through more than half, hammered into the 109's engine. The Daimler-Benz engine seized immediately, the propeller freezing in place. The German pilot had no choice but to bail out, his parachute blossoming white against the blue sky. Bloody hell, Morrison's voice came through, tinged with something that might have been respect. The new boys got teeth, but there was no time to celebrate. The dogfight had scattered the Hurricane flight across 10 miles of sky. James looked around frantically, trying to orient himself. Below, the Stukas had completed their bombing runs and were forming up to return to Sicily. The Messerschmitt escorts were pulling back to cover them. And then James saw him. A lone Messerschmitt, separated from his formation, was limping north, trailing white vapor. Coolant, not smoke. The pilot was wounded, or his aircraft was damaged, or both. The 109 was flying straight and level, all its attention focused on reaching friendly territory. Every instinct screamed at James to let him go. He'd already shot down 2 aircraft on his first mission, more than many pilots achieved in their entire service. He was low on ammunition, his Hurricane was damaged, and the last thing any sane pilot did was chase a wounded enemy alone over open water. But something else drove him forward. Maybe it was the insults from Morrison, maybe it was the trembling. In his hands that he wanted to prove was adrenaline, not fear. Maybe it was just the terrible mathematics of war. Every enemy pilot who made it home was a pilot who'd come back to attack Malta tomorrow. James pushed his throttle forward, ignoring the new vibration in his damaged wing. The wounded Messerschmitt was slower than usual, but still faster than a Hurricane. James would get 1 pass, maybe 2, before his ammunition ran out. The German pilot spotted him. James saw the 109 try to accelerate, but the damaged engine couldn't respond. The Messerschmitt began to weave, making itself a harder target, but the pilot's options were limited. Too low, and he'd hit the water. Too high, and he'd burn more precious fuel and coolant. James closed to 200 yards, 150, 100. His finger tightened on the trigger. The Messerschmitt filled his gun sight. Then the 109 snap-rolled hard right, a desperate defensive maneuver that should have been impossible for a damaged aircraft. The German pilot had been playing possum, pretending to be more damaged than he was, waiting for James to get close enough for a killing shot. The Messerschmitt's guns blazed. Shells punched through James's Hurricane, one smashing into the instrument panel in an explosion of glass and sparks. Another struck the armor plate behind James's seat, the impact feeling like being kicked by a horse. But James didn't break off. Instead, he did something completely insane. He pulled up and over, executing a half-loop that brought him down on the Messerschmitt's tail from above. The German pilot, committed to his attack, couldn't react in time. James fired his last ammunition in one long burst. He watched the tracer rounds walk up the 109's fuselage, saw the canopy explode, saw the fighter's nose drop. The Messerschmitt hit the Mediterranean at 200 miles per hour, disintegrating on impact. 3 kills. On his first mission, with a damaged aircraft and almost no combat experience. James turned for home, his hands shaking so badly now that he could barely hold the control column. His Hurricane was trailing vapor from a ruptured coolant line. The cockpit smelled of smoke and hot oil. Warning lights covered what remained of his instrument panel like a Christmas tree. Malta appeared ahead, a brown smudge against the blue Mediterranean. Anti-aircraft fire still dotted the sky over Valletta, the gunners engaging the last of the retreating Stukas. James could see smoke rising from new fires in the dockyard. Red 4, this is Takali Control. We have you on approach. Are you declaring emergency? James keyed his radio. Control, Red 4. I'm operational. Just bringing her home. His Hurricane shuddered. the engine beginning to overheat. James coaxed it lower, aiming for the cratered runway at Takali. The other hurricanes had already landed. He could see ground crew and pilots gathered outside the dispersal hut, watching. The hurricane's wheels touched down hard, bouncing twice before settling. James applied brakes gently. Too hard and the damaged aircraft might ground loop. The fighter rolled to a stop near the sandbag revetments, where ground crew waited with fire extinguishers. James sat in the cockpit for a long moment, unable to move. His whole body was shaking now, adrenaline giving way to delayed shock. He'd been in combat for less than 20 minutes, but it felt like hours had passed. Thornhill appeared beside the aircraft, climbing up on the wing to help James unbuckle his harness. The squadron leader's face was grim. Morrison went down, saw his chute, so Jerry probably picked him up. Davies took a 20mm through the engine and ditched in the harbor. Rescue boat got him. Henderson's nursing a shot-up hurricane back from the north, and Thornhill looked at the bullet holes covering James's aircraft, at the shattered canopy and smoking engine, and shook his head slowly. Ground crew counted your hits. 3. Confirmed kills. 3 Messerschmitt 109s. On your first mission. He paused. That's either the luckiest flying I've ever seen, or you're a natural-born killer. Not sure which scares me more. James finally found his voice. I did what training taught me, sir. Stayed calm, looked for opportunities. Stayed calm. Thornhill laughed, but there was no humor in it. You chased a wounded 109 over open water with a damaged aircraft. That's not calm, Whitmore. That's either bravery or stupidity. And in this business, there's not much difference. The ground crew chief, a grizzled sergeant named Wilson, was already examining the hurricane's damage. She's done, sir. Coolant systems shot, hydraulics are leaking, main spars compromised. This bird won't fly again without a complete rebuild, and we don't have the parts or time. Another hurricane lost. Malta was bleeding aircraft faster than replacements could arrive. Every fighter shot down, every aircraft damaged beyond. Repair brought the island one step closer to having no air defense at all. The other pilots emerged from the dispersal hut as James climbed down from the wing. His legs almost gave out when he hit the ground. He grabbed the wing for support, hoping no one noticed. But they had noticed. They noticed everything. 3 kills, said Henderson, a stocky Welshman with burn scars on his hands. 3 bloody kills. Do you know how long it took me to get 3 kills? 4 months. 4 months of flying. Every day, twice a day, dodging flak and Messerschmitts. Flight Lieutenant Peters, who'd been on Malta since before Christmas, stepped forward. What was it like? Your first kill? James thought about the young German pilot, the face he'd glimpsed just before firing. Terrifying, and then nothing. Just moving to the next one. That's the thing they don't tell you in training, Peters said quietly. It's not Hollywood. You don't feel triumphant. You just feel empty, like you've crossed a line you can never uncross. Thornhill cut in. Whitmore, you've got 2 hours to rest, eat something, and get your head right. Then you're back up. We've got intelligence suggesting another raid this afternoon. James stared at him. 2 hours? But Welcome to Malta, Thornhill said. We fly until we can't fly anymore. Then we fly anyway. 2 hours. Use them wisely. The debriefing was held in a stone building that had once been a farmhouse. An intelligence officer, Lieutenant. Crawford took James through every detail of the mission. Altitude, speed, enemy positions, weapons effectiveness. He seemed particularly interested in the 3rd kill, the Messerschmitt that had played damaged. That's a new tactic, Crawford said, making notes. Pretending to be wounded to draw pursuit. We need to warn the other squadrons. Did you notice any markings on the aircraft? Unit insignia? James closed his eyes, trying to remember. In the heat of combat, most details had blurred together, but yellow nose. And I think a shield or crest on the fuselage. Black and white? That's Jagdgeschwader 53, the Picasse squadron, based in Sicily. Some of the Luftwaffe's best pilots. Crawford looked up from his notes. You just shot down 3 of Goering's finest on your first day. They're not going to be happy about that. I wasn't trying to make them happy, sir. Crawford actually smiled. No, I suppose not. All right, Whitmore. Get some rest. And, well done. Truly. James walked to the mess, a converted cellar with wooden tables and mismatched chairs. The cook, a cheerful Maltese woman named Rosa, served him a plate of bully beef and hard bread. It was the standard fare. Malta was under blockade, and fresh food was rarer than ammunition. "I heard about your fight," Rosa said in accented English. "3 Germans. Everyone is talking." "They talk too much," James said, but he managed a weak smile. He ate mechanically, tasting nothing. His hands still shook, slightly, and every loud noise made him flinch. Post-combat stress, the doctors called it. Most pilots experienced it after their first real action. The other pilots gave him space, which James appreciated. He wasn't ready for congratulations or questions. He just wanted to sit quietly and process what had happened, but there was no time. 2 hours, Thornhill had said. 2 hours to transform from a terrified rookie into a veteran pilot ready to do it all again. James found a cot in the pilot's quarters, a series of interconnected caves carved into the limestone beneath the airfield. The caves were cool and dark, offering some protection from bombing raids. He lay down, knowing he should sleep, but unable to quiet his racing thoughts. He kept seeing the first Messerschmitt, the one he'd shot down in the initial engagement, kept wondering about the pilot. Did he have a family, a girlfriend waiting in Germany? Had he been drafted, or had he volunteered, full of patriotic fervor, just as James had? War made philosophers of everyone, eventually. Or corpses. Sleep came in fragments, troubled by dreams of falling aircraft and faces glimpsed through gun sights. When Wilson shook him awake, James felt like he'd barely closed his eyes. "Time, sir. Radar's picking up another formation inbound, big one." James stumbled to his feet, his body protesting every movement. His neck hurt from the combat maneuvers. His hands were sore from gripping the control column. His ears still rang from the gunfire. But he could fly. That's all that mattered. The Hurricane waiting for him was different from his morning aircraft. This one was older, more worn. The paint was faded, and patches covered old bullet holes. Someone had named her Malta Maid and painted a crude illustration of a girl in a bikini on the nose. "She's not pretty, but she flies," Wilson said, helping James with his parachute harness. "Guns are freshly loaded, full fuel, and I checked everything twice. You bring her back. You hear? We're running out of aircraft faster than pilots, which is saying something." The afternoon sky was different from the morning's clear blue. Clouds had rolled in from the north, heavy and dark with the promise of rain. Good bombing weather. The clouds would give the attackers cover until the last moment. Thornhill's briefing was terse. 30-plus bandits, mix of bombers and fighters. They're going for the fuel dumps this time. If they hit them, we're done. No fuel means no flights, which means Malta becomes a helpless target. Clear? Everyone nodded. The mathematics were brutal but simple. Defend the fuel, or die slowly when you couldn't fly anymore. This time, James flew as Red 3, a promotion of sorts. Henderson would watch his 6, which was both comforting and terrifying. If James made a mistake, Henderson would pay for it. They climbed through the clouds, breaking into clear sky at 18,000 feet. The Mediterranean spread below them, the clouds casting massive shadows on the water, beautiful and deadly. "Contacts, 11 o'clock high," Henderson called. "Jesus, there's dozens of them." The German formation was larger than the morning's raid. Junkers Ju-88 medium bombers in tight boxes, each box protected by circling Messerschmitts. They'd learned from the morning's losses and were taking no chances. "Same plan as before," Thornhill said. "Break up the fighter screen. Let the flak take the bombers. Work in pairs. Don't get separated." "Good." "Hunting?" The Hurricanes dove into the attack, and once again James found himself in the heart of chaos. A Messerschmitt appeared in front of him, so suddenly he almost collided with it. He fired on instinct, saw his round strike home, saw the 109 roll over and dive away trailing smoke. "Splash one!" Henderson's voice excited. "Good shoot in Red 3. But there was no time to celebrate. 2 more Messerschmitts were converging on him from different angles, a coordinated attack designed to give him no escape. James pulled hard right, then reversed left, trying to throw off their aim. Tracer rounds filled the air around him, a deadly light show. One of the Messerschmitts overshot, and suddenly Henderson was there, guns blazing. The 109 staggered under the impact, pieces flying off its tail, then nosed over and fell. "Even trade," Henderson laughed. "You save me, I save you. That's how it works." The radio chatter was constant now. Pilots calling out targets, warnings, confirmations. Someone was screaming, someone else was praying, and underneath it all the steady crackle of static and distance. James spotted a Messerschmitt climbing away from the fight, trying to gain altitude for another attack. He pushed his throttle forward, coaxing every bit of speed from the hurricane. The 109 pilot saw him coming and turned to engage, confident in his aircraft's superiority. They met head-on again, both pilots firing. James felt impacts hammer his hurricane, the engine cowling, the wings, something in the tail. But he kept his finger on the trigger, kept his aircraft pointed at the enemy. The Messerschmitt's canopy exploded. The fighter snap-rolled, inverted and fell, the pilot either dead or incapacitated. James's 5th kill in a single day. But his hurricane was hurt. The engine was running rough, misfiring. Oil pressure was dropping. He was losing altitude. "Red 3, you're smoking!" Henderson's urgent voice. "Get out of here. Head for base." James turned south, nursing the damaged hurricane toward Malta. Behind him, the battle raged on. He could hear it on the radio, the desperate calls and confirmations. But he had his own problems now. The engine seized completely 3 miles from the coast. One moment it was running rough. The next it was dead, the propeller freezing in place. James was suddenly flying a very expensive glider, losing altitude at 500 feet per minute. "Mayday, mayday, this is Red 3. Engine failure. Attempting dead stick. Landing at Takali. Copy Red 3, field is clear. Wind is south-southwest at 10 knots. Good luck." James lined up his approach, judging distance and altitude by eye. Too high, and he'd overshoot into the sea. Too low, and he'd crash short of the runway. He had one chance to get this right. The hurricane glided down, wind whistling through the battle damage. James could see the runway ahead, could see the emergency crews scrambling into position. He was coming in hot, too fast without engine. Power to slow him. The wheels touched down hard. The hurricane bounced, came down again, and James stood on the brakes. The fighter skidded sideways, tires screaming, heading straight for a line of parked aircraft. At the last second, James ground-looped the hurricane deliberately, spinning it around. The violent maneuver stopped the aircraft just feet from a fuel truck, but the stress was too much for the damaged airframe. The landing gear collapsed, and the hurricane settled onto its belly. With a grinding crash, James sat in the cockpit, hands shaking while foam-suited crash crews surrounded the aircraft. He was alive. Against all odds, he'd survived his first full day of combat. The afternoon raid had cost Malta 3 more hurricanes and 2 pilots. But the fuel dumps were safe, protected by a combination of fighter defense and anti-aircraft fire. The Germans had lost 11 aircraft, according to preliminary counts. James's 5th kill had been confirmed by multiple witnesses. That evening, Thornhill called him into the squadron office. The squadron leader looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Whitmore, I've been flying fighters since 1937. I've seen a lot of pilots come and go, but I've never seen anyone do what you did today. 5 confirmed kills in your first 2 missions. That's unprecedented." "Just luck, sir," James said automatically. "Luck." Thornhill lit a cigarette, his hand steady despite everything. "Maybe, or maybe you've got something. Most pilots don't. Instinct, timing. Whatever it is, we need more of it. We're getting replacement pilots every week. Boys just like you were this morning. Terrified, inexperienced. Most of them die in their first week." He paused, studying James carefully. "I'm assigning you to training duty. Every spare moment you're not flying combat, you'll be working with the new arrivals, teaching them what you learned today, how to survive, how to fight, how to come home." James started to protest, but Thornhill held up a hand. "This isn't a reward, Whitmore. This is survival. Malta needs pilots who can last more than a week. You lasted a day and got 5 kills doing it. Those rookies deserve to learn from someone who actually survived their first combat." That night, James lay in his cot in the limestone caves, listening to the distant rumble of bombs falling on Valletta. The Luftwaffe was conducting a night raid, and there was nothing the hurricane pilots could do. Malta had no night. Fighters. He thought about the 5 German pilots he'd shot down. 5 men who'd woken up that morning expecting to go home that night. 5 families who'd soon receive telegrams. 5 lives ended by his guns. War was supposed to feel glorious, wasn't it? That's what the recruitment posters said. That's what the newsreels showed, but lying in the darkness, listening to bombs and distant screaming, James felt only hollow. Outside, Malta burned. And tomorrow, he'd do it all again. Because that's what war was. Not glory or heroism or any of the words they used in peacetime. It was survival. doing terrible things so that hopefully, someday, you could stop doing terrible things. Peters found him in the caves around midnight. The older pilot sat down without asking, offering James a cigarette. "Can't sleep either," Peters asked. "Keep seeing their faces," James admitted. "The pilots, wondering who they were." "That's good," Peters said, surprising him. "The day you stop wondering, the day you stop seeing them as people, that's when you should be worried. We're not machines, Whitmore. We're men who had to become killers to survive. Don't lose sight of that." They sat in silence for a while. Two pilots in a war, neither had started, but both had to fight. "How many have you shot down?" James finally asked. 11 confirmed, 3 probables, Peters said. "Each one has a face, each one has a name, even if I don't know it. I remember them all, every single one. I figure I owe them that much. Does it get easier?" "No," Peters said simply. "It gets harder. You get better at compartmentalizing, better at pushing it down. But easier? Never." The next morning, James was assigned his first training duty. 3 new pilots had arrived overnight, ferried in by aircraft carrier. They looked exactly as James had looked just 36 hours ago, young, scared, trying desperately to hide it. Their names were Collins, Stewart, and McCarthy. Collins was from Liverpool, Stewart from Edinburgh, McCarthy from Dublin. All 3 had been rushed through training, given barely enough hours to solo before being shipped to Malta. James stood in front of them in the dispersal hut, uncomfortably aware that he was only marginally more experienced than they were. What could he possibly teach them that would matter? Then he thought about Morrison, who'd called him New Boy, and was now in a German prison camp. Thought about the Messerschmitt that had played damaged, the trap he'd almost fallen into. Thought about everything he'd learned in one day of combat. "Right," James said. "Everything they taught you in training? Forget half of it. It won't work here. The Messerschmitt 109 is faster than our Hurricane. It climbs better. It dives better. In a straight fight, it'll kill you, so don't fight straight." He spent 2 hours with them, sharing every lesson he'd learned. How to use the Hurricane's turning ability, how to watch for traps, how to stay calm when everything around you was chaos, how to remember that the enemy pilots were people too, but that couldn't stop you from doing what needed to be done. They listened with the intensity of men who knew their lives depended on it, because they did. That afternoon, James flew his 3rd combat mission. The raids were smaller now. The Germans were rotating squadrons, giving their pilots rest. James flew with Collins as his wingman, the rookie pilot's Hurricane staying glued to his tail. They encountered a small formation of Messerschmitts over the coast. James engaged cautiously, making sure Collins stayed with him, calling out every move before he made it. When a 109 got on Collins's tail, James was there immediately, driving the German off with a sustained burst that damaged the enemy fighter's engine. Collins managed to stay alive. That was victory enough. Over the following weeks, James became something he'd never expected to be, a veteran. He flew 4, sometimes 5 missions a day. He shot down 3 more aircraft, bringing his total to 8 confirmed kills. More importantly, he kept his assigned rookies alive. Collins, Stewart, and McCarthy all survived their first week, then their second. The raids continued relentlessly. Malta was running out of everything: food, fuel, ammunition, aircraft, pilots. But it held on, defiant, refusing to yield despite the impossible odds. James learned to compartmentalize, just as Peters had said. The faces of the enemy pilots faded slightly, though they never disappeared entirely. He became efficient, clinical even, in combat. But in the quiet moments in the caves at night, he remembered that he was still human. Letters from home helped. His mother wrote about everyday things: the weather, the garden, news from neighbors. She never asked about combat, sensing perhaps that he couldn't talk about it even if he wanted to. His father, a veteran of the Great War, sent shorter notes that said more: "Proud of you. Come home safe." One evening in late April, Thornhill called the squadron together. The squadron leader looked different, older somehow, despite only 6 weeks having passed since James arrived. "We've received word," Thornhill said quietly. "Operation Bowery has succeeded. HMS Eagle and USS Wasp delivered 60 Spitfires to Malta. They're being assembled now. We'll finally have fighters that can match the 109s. The room erupted in cheers. Spitfires. Real air superiority fighters, not the outdated Hurricanes they'd been flying. But Thornhill wasn't smiling. There's more. The Germans know about the Spitfires. Intelligence suggests they're planning a massive raid to destroy them on the ground before they can fly. Everything they have, every bomber, every fighter, they're going to try to crush Malta once and for all. The cheering stopped. When? Peters asked. Tomorrow morning, Thornhill said. We'll have maybe a dozen Spitfires operational by then. The rest will be our Hurricanes, against what intelligence estimates is over 100 German and Italian aircraft. The biggest raid yet. Nobody spoke. The mathematics were impossible. Even with Spitfires, they were outnumbered 10-1. Get some rest, Thornhill said. All of you. Tomorrow we find out if Malta lives or dies. That night, James wrote a letter home, just in case. He kept it simple, telling his parents he loved them, that he was proud to serve, that they shouldn't worry. He gave the letter to Rosa in the mess, asking her to mail it if something happened to him. Nothing will happen, Rosa said firmly. You are blessed, I can tell. James wished he had her certainty. The pre-dawn scramble was the largest James had seen. Every Hurricane that could fly, plus the handful of operational Spitfires, climbed into the dark sky. James flew a Spitfire for the first time. The difference from the Hurricane was immediately apparent. The aircraft was faster, more responsive, more alive. If he survived this, he thought, he might actually enjoy flying. Again. They climbed to 25,000 feet, higher than the Hurricanes could effectively operate. Below them, the island was dark, except for the harbor lights and a few fires from the previous night's raid. The sun rose behind them, painting the eastern sky gold and red, beautiful and terrible. And then they came. The German formation filled the northern sky, bombers in massive boxes, fighters stacked above and around them in protective layers. More aircraft than James had ever seen in one place. It looked less like a military formation and more like a migration of deadly birds. Dear God, someone whispered over the radio. All aircraft, Thornhill's voice cut through the fear. Remember why we're here. Those bombers want to destroy everything we've fought for, every mission we've flown, every mate we've lost. Today we show them that Malta does not surrender. Malta does not break. Malta fights. Good hunting, gentlemen. The fighters dove into the attack. What followed was less a battle than a sustained brawl that lasted over 2 hours. Aircraft filled the sky at every altitude, every angle. James lost count of how many times he fired, how many enemies he engaged. His Spitfire danced through the formations, faster and more agile than anything he'd flown before. He shot down 2 Messerschmitts in the opening minutes, using the Spitfire's superior speed to bounce them before they could react. A Machi C-202 tried to engage him, and James outturned the Italian fighter, before sending it down in flames. His 4th kill of the battle came when he caught a Junkers Ju-88 bomber, separated from its formation, hitting it with such concentrated fire that the bomber's wing simply folded and tore away. But the cost was terrible. James watched Collins die, his Hurricane exploding when a Messerschmitt's cannon shells hit his fuel tank, saw Stuart's aircraft, trailing fire, heading down toward the sea. The radio was chaos. Screams, prayers, curses, triumph, and despair mixed together. The bombers that got through hammered the airfields. James could see explosions blossoming across Takali, across Lucca, across the dispersal areas where the precious Spitfires were parked. Each explosion meant another aircraft lost, another piece of Malta's defense destroyed. But not all the bombers got through. The combination of fighters and anti-aircraft fire created a wall of death that the Germans couldn't penetrate intact. Bombers fell from the sky, trailing fire and debris. Parachutes blossomed like terrible flowers. James's ammunition ran out after his 4th kill. He continued to fly aggressive passes anyway, hoping to break up formations and give the bombers' gunners something to think about. It worked. One bomber, rattled by James's attacks, jettisoned its bombs early, the explosives falling harmlessly into the sea. When the Germans finally broke off, the sky was full of smoke and falling debris. James counted at least 30 parachutes descending, both Allied and Axis. The Mediterranean was dotted with crash sites and burning fuel slicks. He landed at Takali to find the airfield heavily damaged, but still operational. Crews were already filling in bomb craters, pulling damaged aircraft clear of the runway. Of the dozen Hurricanes and half-dozen Spitfires that had taken off that morning, 8 returned. Thornhill was waiting as James climbed from his cockpit. The squadron leader's face was grim. but there was something else in his eyes, a kind of fierce pride. Preliminary counts are coming in. We downed 37 of theirs confirmed, probably 20 more damaged enough they won't make it home. But we lost 6 pilots and 8 aircraft. James thought about Collins, about the young pilot from Liverpool who'd listened so carefully during training, who'd followed James's instructions exactly, who'd done everything right and still died. Was it worth it? James heard himself ask. Thornhill looked at the damaged airfield, at the Spitfires that had survived, at the smoke rising from across the island. "We're still here," he said finally. "Malta's still here. Tomorrow we'll fly again." "Yes, Whitmore, it was worth it."